Welcome to CMMS Radio, a podcast and general resource for all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, from selection to implementation to help you make better choices and have a successful CMMS journey. We'll bring in experts along the way to help us learn more about CMMS, facilities operations, and much more. If you need help with the CMMS project, send a message at cmmsradio.com using the What's on Your Mind link. Suggest a topic, share your CMMS story, or ask questions. People are asking why I like FlowPath, facility management platform. With 2 decades in the industry and a successful CMMS exit of my own, I value FlowPath's user-friendly and adaptable solution. It's ideal for school districts, colleges, integrated facilities management companies, or multi-location maintenance environments. It's more than features. It's about the team, their approach, and real maintenance experiences that count. FlowPath delivers on its promises. They take care of their customers. Companies I know personally are thriving with FlowPath. Explore it yourself with a demo tailored for CMMS Radio listeners by clicking the link below. Well, thank you for tuning in today, everybody. We are joined by Matt Selbie. He is the president and founder of Opiniator, and he has more than 20 years of leadership experience in the energy and high technology sector. Opiniator is an on-location digital comment card. It's delivering customer feedback via their mobile phone. There's no app needed. It works on all phones immediately, and it allows people to tell the business something needs fixing. It is all about the prevention side, getting these extra eyes on the facility for quicker resolutions and improved customer experiences. Matt, welcome to CMMS Radio.
Very good. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for having me on. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. And by the way, your description of me, I'm going to have to hire you myself. That was so good.
Well, I'm available. Yeah, I like bringing people on and kind of showcasing, who they are, what they kind of stand for, the process or processes they've seen, what they've gone through. So it's a perfect place for me to jump in and kind of talk about how I understand that Opiniator is a closed loop tool. It creates a ticket that is tracked until closure, and that's for patrons of an establishment or location. They can use it to report back on their experiences, what they see that might be a problem. But first, I have to ask about how this all started for you, Matt. So if you could please talk about your background and how that led you to building Opiniator.
Sure. Again, but thanks very much for having me on. So my background, I'm a Brit. There's no points for that, and I spend most of my career in the energy sector. So one of the things that I ended up doing here in the States when I was brands manager for an oil company was we studied a lot of data around customer defection. Why do customers defect from certain businesses? And it's difficult to do because most of the time that defection is not 100%. It's what they call declining wallet share. So somebody spends just a little less with you each week, just a little less, and so it declines over time. And one of the things that we found, this was in gasoline marketing, convenience stores, and so on, was that many service businesses here in the States have a double-digit defection rate. Double-digit. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know that many businesses that can sustain double-digit defection rates for too long. So that was the first alarm bell that rang. And at that time, we thought about, well, what would make a huge difference if that business could collect real-time feedback, fix the issue, and connect with that guest? So that was the first little plant. And then to cut another long story short, I'm a motorcyclist, all right? I'm a big fan of bikes. The bad news is it's not a Harley. The good news is it's a Triumph. And when I bought a new Triumph, I was called, Greg, probably 2 months after I bought the bike. And I was called by a market research company working for Triumph. And one of the first things that they said to me was, well, please tell us about the appearance of the sales associate who sold you the bike. Now, I don't know about you, Greg. I'm gray haired like you. I can barely remember the names of my children or what I had for breakfast. So you're expecting me to give you a critique and evaluation of what some pimply kid who sold me the bike 2 months ago. So it seemed to me that it was asinine, the techniques that companies are using in order to improve the business when the feedback that they generate was handled so badly. And so I thought there had to be a better way. And in doing so, we created some technology that allows this closed loop feedback to occur. And what I mean by closed loop, I want you to hold on to your hats because I'm going to hit you with a stat that if the defection metric didn't get you, then this one will. So some work by Gartner, which is a market research company, conducted probably 8 or 9 years ago, but I suspect it's just as relevant, said 95, well, here's the good news: 95% of all US businesses collect customer feedback. Whoopee, okay? Champagne corks, fantastic. Here's the bad news: of those 95%, only 10% actually do anything with the data. What a waste of time. So again, you've kind of got these three things going together. One is the realization that there were many businesses with high defection rates. Bad news. The second realization was that many organizations have absolutely no idea what they're doing in terms of collecting feedback data. And then the third thing that adds to the impetus for setting up the business was many organizations don't actually do anything with the data that they collect. So lo and behold, I thought there was an opportunity in the market. We developed some software, and now we've been around for 10 years or so.
It's interesting the way you point out not just the stats behind it, but we all know those experiences when whether we're buying something or whatever type of facility it is that we're in, where sometimes our expectations aren't met and we'd love an opportunity to communicate it. And I think a good percentage of us know, at least depending on, I suppose, what age group you're in,
Mm-hmm.
you already know that's a complete waste of time to tell anybody because we know they're not going to do anything about it. They don't care. You've already been there. You bought something, whatever it was. They're over it. However, when you do find those companies that utilize that data in a
Mm-hmm.
meaningful way that's impactful for the client experience,
Mm-hmm.
for the facility or otherwise, they have that extra level of not just kind of caring, but they actually give you the experiences that you actually want because
Yep.
they're listening to everybody. But I think for them to listen and do something about the feedback, I think it comes at such a great cost that they're unwilling to make those changes. And we see this in the world that I play in all the time, which is
Sure.
in maintenance management and
Yep.
organizations. And some things, you go high enough up, they don't see it, they don't feel it, they don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this has got a lot to do with that. And I'm also reminded of something I'm always saying to everybody all the time. I'm like, man, we need to bring back the 1950s because customer service is dead.
Mm-hmm.
So it all kind of
Mm-hmm.
sits in that kind of realm. I'm curious though, does Opiniator, as like an on-site interactive tool, if you will, to
Mm-hmm.
gather the information from these extra eyes and from the patrons of your facility, does it integrate with or communicate with computerized maintenance management systems? Is it capable of doing that?
So the good news is, yes, it is. We realized earlier on that if the value that we bring is, as you've just described, an additional set of eyes and ears to that maintenance group, then it needs to be connected into whatever asset management or maintenance management program they have. So we do have some open APIs that we've developed, which allow the two systems to be able to talk. Now, with most things here, you need to have some rules baked in, otherwise the whole thing could run amok. So, for example, if this was used, we do a lot of work in restrooms. By the way, restrooms are one of those areas which seem to be a barometer for the general public of the quality of that brand. If you walk into a restroom, and heaven forbid it's in a hospital, and the restroom is poor, highly likely you're going to associate that quality with the rest of the brand. So it really needs to work well. Anyway, going back to your question, if the customer says, if the restroom user says, hey, there's no toilet paper, you probably don't want to have that necessarily connected to the maintenance management program and set 30 people off with great arms of toilet paper underneath their arms. So the answer to the question is yes, we saw that as a early win that would provide some additional function to the maintenance management program simply by allowing either visitors or customers. But the same program, Opiniator, can also be used by staff to use the same thing. So it's basically an inspection tool as well. And a third example is we do quite a lot of work with hotels, and one of the CEO of this small hotel chain insists that any member of staff who visits another hotel within the same chain must, I repeat, must visit it and answer 6 questions about what they found there. So you've now got 3 use cases. The first is guests, the second is inspections on a regular basis, and the third is ad hoc, irregular inspections by staff. And yes, it does feed into the maintenance management program if you'd like it to.
Yeah, and so I'm thinking about all this and how you're describing it, whether it's hotels, retail locations, malls, hospitals, all those things, and I'm taken back to my days in the actual maintenance sector where we were doing countless, I couldn't even estimate the number of facility walks that we were doing. And the way we ran our business, the way we built it was on how can we do what everybody does, but do it better so that we can be the standout, at least in our local area, and then grow throughout Southern California and all these types of things. And we said, well, we're just going to do what we say we're going to do, which is where most organizations that are providing maintenance or some type of service will fall short inevitably,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then we were always wondering, where can we get more information about how we are doing? Not just from the client, but when you talk about the patrons and that feedback, it just creates those extra opportunities. And I love what you said about like if you're at a hospital or something like that, or any place and you're using the restroom, the condition of those facilities is a direct reflection of
Mm-hmm.
the place that you're at. You know, I
Yep.
won't say any names, but you go to your favorite coffee shop and you're grabbing your coffee, they're getting it ready, you go use the bathroom, and it's a disaster.
Yep. Yep.
So this really it sounds like a very important mitigation tool. And then the other thing about restrooms, you remember you'd see it hanging on the wall of a restroom. There's like a checklist because somebody on the maintenance staff came by and checked off a few things. It just doesn't work.
No. I mean, and we see that time and time again. The other thing that it does is that it destroys any value, because having a checklist on there is a symbolic reference by that company that, hey, we're doing something about it. The problem is that if the words and the music don't add up, that is, your expectation doesn't meet the actuality, you basically shot yourself in the foot. Now, I've thrown in 3 metaphors there automatically. And I would say one of the issues that we encourage anybody that we do business with is, by having this type of overt tool out there, the good news is you will gain a political / symbolic win, because it basically says, hey, we care. But at the same time, you've now entered into an informal contract with that guest to basically say, on the one hand, your feedback is important. If you don't do anything about it, you've really shot yourself in the foot. So part of what we bring to the piece is this idea of, you'll get the alerts, but also we track what you do. So Greg, if you were the maintenance guy at a hospital, not only do we track the issues in that restroom or restrooms, but we also measure how long it takes you to fix whatever deficiency has been given. And we then even internal benchmark you against your peers. So all this feedback stuff is all very well and good, but once you let the kind of the genie out of the bottle and you say this is important, if you don't follow up on it, you're kind of toast. And the other thing, just going back to your comment about checklists and sort of clipboards and all of that stuff, is they have such a bad reputation. I don't really think anybody believes that they're an efficient method by which you can gauge the performance of an asset. And they're certainly not a good quality control tool. It's kind of old school. And, in these times of low, really low unemployment, their uses, I just think they should be put out into the graveyard of, dinosaurs. They're just not where you want to go.
Right, right. And everybody's got that the immediacy impact, so to speak, as they're moving through the world. We want everything now because
Sure.
of technology. And if
Yep.
technology is not being utilized,
Yep.
then you're even creating that much more risk. And I think checklists and hard copy work orders and all those things, those are all fine and good if you can meet the this is going to sound crazy, the general placeholder, no news is good news.
Yep.
That used to be a thing
Yep.
that actually held up pretty well, but we all
Absolutely.
know it's not the case at all. No news means somebody's pissed off and they're not telling you about it.
Yeah. And the other thing that we've seen, which is ironic, and it's an amusing anecdote, but it's not an amusing case study, is because of the pandemic, many organizations have invested in additional hardware, monitoring hardware, that is supposed to be the all-seeing eye, a bit like, out of Lord of the Rings, the sort of revolving eye. But what we found dealing with maintenance managers who've installed all of this maintenance watch equipment, touchless sensors and people counters and all this sort of stuff, is that half the time it doesn't work. Half the time somebody knocks into it. Half the time, even if you get the data, you don't have the team in place to do anything about it. So, in some ways, Greg, I think you need to go back to basics and say, what is important? Why is it important? And what are we going to do to improve our ability to tackle something that's more important than something else? Rather than overinvest in over complex technologies, which seem to be regularly sold with dazzling skill by consultants that cost you a fortune, go on your capital budget. And, at the end of the day, I'm not really sure that they raise the game. So call me cynical, and you and I are both gray haired, and I'm sort of turning into my dad, being cynical as you get older. I'm just not convinced there's an ROI in this unless you can back it up. And I just don't see that right now.
Well, I don't think that's cynical at all. And I'll tell you why. This is a very common conversation that I have sometimes when the mic is on, way more often when the mic is off. If I'm at a conference, if I'm talking to a friend of mine in the maintenance and reliability space, I'm talking to someone like yourself, and we arrive. And interestingly enough, my next question was going to be about what are you seeing as it relates to technology and the
Yep.
maintenance space? Where's it heading and all that? So, right here, I want to talk about these concepts of technology being like an easy button or this magic solution to these issues and problems. And if the people aren't doing the activities already
Yep.
that would solve that, and
Yep.
then the technology is used to kind of amplify and leverage that, technology will fail if the people
Yep.
don't know what it is, why it is, and why we should use it. And then we get to the real elephant in the room. All this great technology, there's a ton of people that really know how to sell it, but the people that are buying it are maybe being oversold, maybe being upsold, and the delivery is where it fails because those clients that buy that technology, invest in that technology for their organizations, don't get the right deployments, maybe because they didn't know why they were doing it in the first place. So it creates this huge mess. Is it all hype? And I say it's a lot of hype
Mm-hmm.
unless you dig in and focus on the people, the process, and the technology to keep those moving in the same direction. That's where everybody messes up. And it's not any one particular person or the source is really about educating
Right.
and deciding why you're doing this, and then the
Right.
vendors that sell technology have to participate that and make sure people are ready for the technology.
I totally agree. I think that there is a tendency to buy the bright, shiny thing. And the bright, shiny thing is usually oversold by a guy in a sharp suit and a fancy dashboard. Um, and what I would encourage people to think about first, and again, I'm going to go back to, the current environment right now is there aren't enough people. The unemployment rate is so low here. So, here in my home state of Oregon, it's 3.6%. Now, that's below what we used to study in economics classes as full employment. So, you don't have enough people on the ground to be able to take on too many new projects. And the bright, over shiny dashboard, you need to be able to do something with it. Data by itself is meaningless, which is why it's at the beginning of the conversation I started to talk about, 95% of the population of businesses collect feedback, but only 10% do anything with it. And I would say right now we are being oversold on, some people call it the Internet of Things or maintenance management systems or smart devices, and they all look good, but what do they actually do? Show me the ROI for something that's going to appear on your balance sheet, and how is it going to deliver value? So, what we basically say when we go in is, what is it that you're trying to solve? What is the biggest problem that you face, or the three biggest problems? I don't really mind. And once you've established that, what data do you need? If you get that data, what are you then going to do with it? And it's just a chain of thought. Nothing I've said is going to lead me to, riches or get a Nobel Prize. It's all statements of the blindingly obvious.
Mhm.
But what we found is many people are either pushed into, or because of, I don't know, some sort of inertia, they want to buy this new thing without really having to think it through too much. So we say, really strip it back and think about the biggest thing you want to solve and attack that first, and then build it up. This people thing, we see it time and time again, where there are just not enough folk on the ground to be able to react to or do anything with the data, and the data doesn't do something by itself. So we come across many organizations, and it sounds like you have as well, where now that they've bought this thing, we see a certain amount of buyer's remorse, but they kind of keep going because, God damn it, they're going to get their value out of it somehow, and they sort of dig themselves further into a hole.
Yeah.
So I try not to be. I am not cynical by nature, but I am skeptical as to what some organizations are really trying to solve, and have they really thought it through.
Right. And this is so in 2023, I've connected with a lot of new people. A lot of them have become friends, and we're talking about all these same exact things. And the reason we do that, I think, is because we're all passionate about it. We'd love to see it
Mhm.
change. I think about whether it's a CMMS organization that provides a great product or a series of products, or product like yours, all these different things. They get in these traps on their side where they've got to hit a number, there's
Yeah.
investors and all that.
Yep.
So that complicates things. But going all the way back to the customers, the buyers that are getting these technologies, they learn about it at a conference, they read about it online, they see a video and they're like, oh, I'm going to inquire with that company.
Mhm.
Those are the folks that need the further education about why they're doing what they're doing, just like you were saying. So if they have an end in mind, if they understand the problem that they're solving, and they may not, they may need to learn about their problem during a discovery process with a
Mhm.
potential vendor. And if it's the right kind of vendor or consultant, they're going to ask you and they're going to take you down a path of information gathering for themselves. And the really good ones, if you don't have the problem that they solve best, they're going to tell you on the spot, we don't really solve that, and
Right.
that's not a big enough problem for us to solve it for you. And that's really hard for vendors to do because they're beholden. And
Of
then
course.
the clients, and I say this for everybody out there, if you've got these technologies in place and you are struggling and saying, well, we've got all this data, but it does us no good and we know it, but we don't have
Yeah,
anybody to work on it, go back to whoever sold it to you or find
yeah,
somebody that's different than that person that sold it
yeah,
to you, that's an expert in the space, and reach out to them and say, hey, can you look at my situation and tell me how I can solve it? A
yeah.
lot of times there are really good consultants and vendors out there that will say, yes, I will spend an hour with you going through it, meeting about it, and telling you where I think you can make improvements. The other
Mhm.
thing is on like sensor monitoring. This is the one I'm like the
Yep,
IoT, and all that.
yep,
It's great stuff, but it's only as good as what you can do with it, right?
yep.
The data. Don't get 2,000 sensors for every asset you have in your entire organization or across your campus. Get like 120 sensors for the 120 most critical assets that you actually have decided based on your research, your RFP, and all the data behind it to support. We need that to mitigate this failure that happens on these 120 assets. Do it that way, and you can scale it later if you really want to get clever and just become this dialed in automated facility. But start small with the biggest, most impactful things instead of buying the shiny object.
I totally agree, and I also think the point you made about there is a different skill set in changing processes once data's been received that the organization may not have. So they get this data in, and then, well, how do we change the organization, either staff, resources, protocols? And that may be a different skill set. I think it's highly unlikely that the vendor is going to have that. It's likely that it's either going to be an internal resource or it may be a separate consultant who can detach themselves from one thing and say, this is how we're going to tackle it. And the best organizations we've seen that we either work with or just admire in general have decoupled some of these so that when data comes in, there's a group that looks at data, and then there's a group that says, okay, based on this, this is how we're going to apply it. And some of those resources are internal, some of them are external, using change agents, stuff like that. And then they'll learn, then they can learn to do it internally. So one of the organizations that we're working with is they publish all the customer feedback data and inspection data weekly. They have a person there who goes through the data and delivers a Reader's Digest version of what it's basically saying. This is the top three things that we need to focus on. That then goes to management. And then from management decides, okay, these are the resources that we're going to allocate. And I want this to be fixed within X. So it's a very sequential process, but it's very efficient. And they're not trying to boil the ocean, Greg. They're absolutely not. I mean, you just can't do it. As you say, pick the 120, I think you said 120, whatever it's going to be that really are massively important. And there's ways you can determine that. You can ask your customers, you can look at failure rates, or do whatever it is you want to do. The economic cost of of downtime. So there's different ways of doing it, but apply some structure, start small, and realize that you can grow. You don't want to start big and kind of screw up everything.
I agree. I think, and that's, use any anecdote you want. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a
Right,
time?
exactly,
I'm
exactly.
not eating elephants, everybody. I'm just using that as an example because they're big, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you 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 really got to look at things in that way. And a lot of times this comes down to, I don't know if I want to say common sense. That's not fair. I want to say basic principles
Yeah,
with regards to how we make these decisions. Even with any organization, big or small, think about how it started, why it started. It's the same thing with these technologies that get developed that they're quite brilliant in their own right for what they're doing. And I would love to see more of a focus by vendors that provide it on what they really do rather than, oh, let's get out to the periphery and let's be one thing for everybody.
sure.
They got to quit doing that too. So I'm kind of calling everybody out, clients, users of technology, do the extra work to educate yourselves and have a really good plan, not only about why you're getting this technology, how you're going to deploy it, but what you're going to get out of it. And then vendors essentially reverse engineer that same thing and maybe sell a little bit less so that you can keep a client a hell of a lot longer and they can grow naturally or organically. I think this is really interesting stuff, and getting this extra perspective is very helpful for the listeners, not just to learn about Opiniator, but to get your insights that are really transferable to a lot of different things about industry. We've touched on stuff that you've mentioned, the employment rate, at least in the area that you're at in the
Sure.
Pacific Northwest there in Oregon. And there's another big thing that's going on now that we talk about, and that's the skilled trades gap. And a
Yep.
lot of that is because of kind of the big, kind of the world's getting turned on its head, so to speak. And there's a lot of changes, and there's generational shifting, and boomers are retiring, and all the knowledge is going away. Is there any one thing that you could think of, and it doesn't have to just be one, that would improve the lack of skilled trades that we're seeing in the world? Like where would you say we can do something to improve that going forward?
I think there would be two things that I can think of. One is I do think that these type of skilled trades are very very badly paid. They are inversely paid to the amount of value that they create. So the first thing is to review the pay gap, which I know is easy for me to say when there's high inflation and there's pressure on wages anyway. But that's the fact of the matter is you need to be able to create incentives for people to want to go into these trades and make a sufficient living to be able to be to sustain a good life there. One of the areas where I see this has actually worked quite well is in the area of alternate energy, where wind farms, solar farms need an awful lot of maintenance, need an awful lot of people to go in there, go up the ladders, grease the bearings, do everything else, and the wage rates for those are actually very good. So I think providing the incentives is a big one. I think the second area that would really be able to help is make the, I'm not going to say this particularly elegantly, but make the perception of these trades not sexier, but more challenging. Because if you think about an electrician now, think about, well, a motorcycle I mentioned before, a motorcycle engine now, it's all fly by wire. The motorcycle I ride, there's no cables in it anymore. It's all wires hired up to an engine control system. And so this, I think, presents a very different set of challenges, and quite frankly, an attractive set of challenges to a new group of younger men and women to say, you could well be at the cutting edge of these types of technologies. You play Xbox on one hand, well, why don't you dabble in solar charge units on the other? So I think the industry needs to turn around this view of kind of grease monkey, guy with soot all over his face, one of these people, into something that's much more about cutting edge. So there's an industry pull which says, let's transform the view of these trades as something that younger people want to get into and clearly provide the training for it. And the second one, I do think industries need to invert their pay scales. And where we've seen that happen with the clients that we have, the turnover rate is by far reduced. So you can measure, we've talked, Greg, all this time about outputs and inputs and measurement. Well, you can measure staff turnover rates as well. And the better organizations that we work with measure everything. And customer feedback is one, employee feedback is the second, and turnover rates is a third. So those are a couple of things, and I don't mean to be glib because this is a very, very difficult issue. So all I've just given you is a couple of kind of throwaway lines, but I can say that it seems that there are organizations out there that have tried to attack this with employment schemes, better wages, and suggesting that this is a technology and a trade that really is at the cutting edge.
Yes, yes. And there are not necessarily any right answers or right ways to do this. What I'm thinking of is that we're essentially standing on a mountaintop, kind of shouting it out. And a lot of people are going, yep, I've heard that. And we're saying, yep, we have too. and we're going to keep
Mm.
talking about it,
Mhm.
because if we make just little bits of progress,
Mhm.
that progress is going to pay and yield dividends for a long, long time. If, some 12, 15, 18-year old starts to get interested in, well, there's a new spin on this kind of maintenance stuff, and I can be a little more interested in, by wire type things,
Yep.
where I'm bringing those two worlds together. And we just have to start doing that. I want to see way more shop classes
Yep.
and tech classes come back to high schools, if
Yep.
not junior highs, because a
Yep.
lot of those are gone, and
Yep.
they're easy cuts off the budget. And it's like, that's a huge mistake. And I think everybody knows it, and they just get forced to do it. So we just got to keep bringing it back, bringing it back, bringing it back. I think it's really important. Well, so far, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I'm really happy about it. Just getting to draw out some of your insights. I want to switch to some fun stuff if you're okay with that.
Delighted to.
All right. First fun question. What is your favorite music?
Progressive rock.
Excellent. Next fun question. What is your favorite sport or hobby? And it doesn't matter if you play it or just observe it.
I have to say squash. No, well, I have to say it. I don't have to say it, but it is squash. So, not as popular on the West Coast, seems to be much more popular on the East Coast, and obviously anywhere where the Brits were, squash is everywhere. So that's what I do in order to keep this youthful face
There
up
you
to
go.
snuff.
Now, just a very, very brief, like one line description so that anybody listening that doesn't know what squash is, could you give them a little insight on that?
Sure. Well, it's a much better version than racquetball. It's a it's an indoor sport like racquetball, but with a different racket and different kind of rules. But it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah,
But it's worth checking out.
a lot of similarities. I've played some racquetball in my days, and I don't know if he'll ever hear this, but I got an uncle out there. He calls it putting on the chain mail, because he ain't just playing when he hits the racquetball court. He's going after every point, and
Yeah.
the wall better be careful because he's going to slam into it.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good game. You know when you're finished when you're pouring with sweat after 30 minutes.
Oh yeah, that's a fact. So now the final on the fun questions is, and this, there's no right or wrong answers here.
Mm.
What is your perspective or viewpoint on work life balance?
You know, that's a great question because my perspective is probably severely different to those of my children, whose emphasis on work-life balance, who think about work-life balance. I've never really thought about work-life balance until recently because I guess we came from an era where we probably had not that much and therefore had to work. And through work, you get victories and defeats and you provide and so on. And in a way, work-life balance is it's a very thoughtful exercise to go through. Um, and clearly everybody needs to do it. And I struggle doing it, but I get an enormous amount of pleasure having my own business and working my tail off. Now, as I get older, that probably will diminish, but my thoughts are that it's a very important subject. I think the younger folk tend to overthink it. The older folk probably tend to underthink it, and there should be a sweet spot. But I'm having a blast at the moment.
That's awesome. And I think, the reason I like to make sure everybody knows when I ask that question, there's no right or wrong
No, no, no,
answers.
absolutely not.
It's, this is something that somebody's going to find interesting or not, and they're going to find useful or not. And they're going to say, well, I don't think there's such a thing. Or they're going to say, yeah, you really got to manage that. And it's just a common thing that we all like to think about and talk about. I think it lies somewhere in the middle. And I think for everyone that middle is quite different. And you don't have to do what the person on your left or the right or in front of you or behind you is doing. You
Yeah.
just got to do what you do and be mindful about life in general, because work's a part of it, and everybody's going to do it different. So one thing that's really important to me is I want
Mm.
people to understand how they can get in touch with you. So uh, what I'd like everyone to do is check out Opiniator, they are at opiniator.com. That's OPINIATOR.com. And you can connect with Matthew Selbie on LinkedIn to start your own conversation. And Matt, I want to thank you for being on CMMS Radio with me.
It's been a blast. I've really enjoyed it. I feel as though you've got a podcast that has got such an array of subject matter. So I feel as though I could be some sort of rhetorical unguided missile, and it would still be quite interesting. Talking maintenance and feedback and what's working and really the meaning of life. So I've enjoyed it enormously. Hope you have too, and I'm looking forward to listening to future ones that you have.
I appreciate it, and I appreciate that support. Really, really, really glad that you're able to spend this time with us today.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Greg. Enjoyed it.
You got it. You got it. Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit CMMSradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS, from selection to implementation, to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey.